Vice President Harris, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
Let me start with, look, we're at the 21st marking, if you will, of the September 11th attacks.
Yeah.
This was a foreign terrorist attacking our democracy,
Yeah.
attacking this country.
Yeah.
We're now, as a nation, battling a threat from within. Is the threat equal or greater than what we faced after 9/11?
That's an interesting question. I have held many elected offices as district attorney, attorney general, senator, now vice president, and there's an oath that we always take, which is to defend and uphold our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we don't compare the two in the oath, but we know they both can exist, and we must defend against it. But the fact is, having served, for example, on the Senate Intelligence Committee and now as vice president, I can tell you the nature of a domestic threat versus a foreign threat, they're very different. No, each are dangerous and extremely harmful, but they're different. When I think about it, I think that, when I was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, that was actually my favorite committee when I was in the Senate. The reason is, when we walk through the doors, each of us, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, when we walk through the door of the SCIF, that secure room, press could not come in.
Right.
No cameras, no public, just us. People would take off their jackets, they'd roll up their sleeves, and they were Americans first, focused on the threats to our national security. On common ground, with a common purpose, which is to defend our nation against attacks. Mm-hmm. When I think about what we have been seeing in terms of the attacks from within, I wish that we would approach it the same way as Americans, instead of through some partisan lens. I was obviously...
Sounds like you think this threat is as great. It's a different threat, but it is as great.
And I think it is very dangerous, and I think it is very harmful, and it makes us weaker. I have met with, and I've had conversations with over 100 foreign heads of state, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, kings. And, when we as the United States walk into those rooms around the world, we have had the honor and privilege historically of holding our head up as a defender and an example of a great democracy. And that then gives us the legitimacy and the standing to talk about the importance of democratic principles, rule of law, human rights. And one of the things, though, that comes with that privilege is that we hold ourselves out to be a role model, which means the rest of the world, like any role model, watches what we do to see if it matches up with what we say. So you look at everything from the fact that there are 11 people right now running for Secretary of State, the keepers of the integrity of the voting system of their state, who are election deniers. You've got...
And what's that sending? What message does that send to the world?
Well, you couple that with people who hold some of the highest elected offices in our country who refuse to condemn an insurrection on January 6th. And I think what it sends is a signal that causes people to question, hey, is America still valuing what they talk about, which is the integrity of democracies, which means protecting rule of law and the sanctity of these systems and speaking up when they are attacked. And I'm very concerned about it, Chuck. I'll tell you, I'm very concerned about it because there are so many issues going on in the world that I think require, at least how we as Americans have traditionally thought about what is right, what is good, what should be fought for, what should be human ideals, and certainly the ideals of democracies. Mm-hmm. And I think that through the process of what we've been through, we're starting to allow people to call into question our commitment to those principles. And that's a shame.
Nearly 70% of Republicans don't believe that the president and yourself won the 2020 election legitimately. Do you think you'll ever be able to change their minds?
I find that polling interesting, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm traveling the country. We're here in Houston. I was in, North Carolina. I've been traveling all over the country. I don't find that. I don't get that kind of sense or feedback.
You think you talk to a lot of Republicans?
I think I talk to a lot of Americans, and I'll tell you, when I talk to folks and they know that, for example, there was a bipartisan infrastructure law that, in Durham is going to fix I-40, or here in Houston is going to fix Telephone Road, those are some of their priorities. When I talk to people about what we're doing, that we're going to make sure, especially after the pandemic, that all families, all working families, have access to affordable high-speed internet, and we're going to bring the cost of it down, less $30 a month, plus people are going to get a $100 voucher to buy a laptop or an iPad. People want to hear that. Look what happened in Kansas on the issue of choice. People whoever they voted for in the last election or in the next, stood up and said it is not right that we take a constitutional right from the women of America and deprive them of the ability to make decisions about their own body, and instead say the government's in a better position to do that.
You say you take issue with this idea that there are 70%. Do you think
I just don't experience that.
You don't experience it. You don't know if they exist?
I think that.
Or do you think they just say it?
I would not dare tell anyone what they should think. I'm just telling you that I do believe that when it comes down to the things that wake people up in the middle of the night, that worry them about their future, about their family, about their children or their parents, most of those issues they think of not through the lens of the party with which they're registered to vote. And it is issues like whether they can, drive to work without driving over potholes. It is whether we're going to actually bring down the cost of living with what we just did in terms of prescription medication, and saying that we're going to cap insulin at $35 a month. And by the way, I think the numbers are 1 out of 3 of our seniors has diabetes. And this means now they're not going to have to make a choice, our seniors, between life-saving medication and paying their rent or eating. So these are the issues that I think compel most people in terms of the thoughts they have, the concerns, the worries they have, but also the impediments to their aspirations and their future.
What is a semi-fascist?
Listen, I think that let's not get caught up in politicizing the fact that most people in America know that it is not helpful to our country when we have people who are denying elections or trying to obstruct the outcome of an election where the largest number of people in our country voted for the President of the United States. And when we look at where we are, I think that we have to admit that there are attacks from within, to your first question,
right.
And we need to take it seriously. And we need to stand up together, all of us, and think of this not through partisan lens, but as Americans.
I think back to the president's inaugural address, and he said the following: politics need not be a raging fire destroying everything in its path. And then I think about the language construction he used with semi-fascist. And I understand the dilemma. You got to call it out in order to bring the country together. But it's hard to do both at the same time, isn't it?
Well, here's the thing. Let's talk about our president for a moment. Joe Biden has spent his entire career, it is on for all to see, working across the aisle. His whole career, sometimes he's been criticized for believing in bipartisanship, for believing in compromise, for believing in working across the aisle, finding common ground. His whole career has been that. But there are moments in time when we have to also agree, all good people who care about our country, that there are those who right now are vividly not defending our democracy. And I think we want that our commander-in-chief that the President of the United States will speak up and raise the alarm about what this means to our strength and our future, much less our integrity.
I'm curious, when you see the Democratic Party and some parts of the party funding ads to promote some of these election deniers in primaries, whether it's Michigan, the high-profile race there, Illinois, Colorado, New Hampshire, it looks like a cynical, a little bit cynical, and the president went out of his way to say there are good Republicans here. Should you leave the good Republicans alone in a primary? Is the Democratic Party making a mistake here by those people could win if you're not careful?
I mean, listen, I'm not going to tell people how to run their campaigns. I ran in terms of statewide office.
Would you have done this? Would you have done this? Is this something you'd be comfortable with?
I'm not going to tell people how to run their campaigns, Chuck. I ran for a statewide for Attorney General, re-election, won both times, for Senate, won that race, and I know that it is best to let a candidate, along with their advisors, let them make the decision based on what they believe is in the best interest of their state. I'm not going to tell people what to do.
You're not worried that this reflects poorly on the Democrats?
I think that what we have to focus on is that in 60 days as of this interview, in less than 2 months, we are looking at a midterm election in which so much is on the line. Take, for example, the issue of choice. The United States Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision just took a constitutional right that had been recognized from the women of America, from the people of America. Well, how does that relate to the midterms? Our president has said he will not let the filibuster get in the way. If the Senate, through a majority vote, votes to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, he will sign it into law. You know what that means? In the midterms, we need to hold on to the Senate and get 2 more. And then we can put into law the protections of Roe v. Wade. Everything is on the line when you think about the millions of women and people in America who care about them, who understand the significance of protecting a woman's right to make decisions about her own body,
so the Democrats
instead of her
get 52
government
Senate seats,
telling her what to do.
52 Senate seats or more. Legislative filibuster gone, or just on this issue?
The president has been clear on this issue and on a very important issue in addition to that important issue, which is voting rights. And the president has been very clear. He will sign into law and not let the filibuster get in the way, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Because what is happening in our country, in states around our country, including this very state, they are passing laws making it more difficult for people to vote. And so our president has said we need to have protections to make sure that every American, whoever they vote for, has the unobstructed ability to do that when it is otherwise their right. So everything is on the line in these elections in just less than 2 months.
When you were a senator, you weren't ready to get rid of the legislative filibuster as of 2017. What has changed?
Well, let's talk about what we have seen around the country, in particular after together with Joe Biden, when we won, and he became president and I became vice president, which was as a result of some of the highest number of people voting that have ever voted in a presidential election. And then you almost saw, almost immediately, so-called extremist leaders around the country starting to pass laws making it more difficult for people to vote. Because I guess it worried them that people realized, hey, I'm working 2 jobs, but a drop box makes it easier for me to fill out the ballot in the middle of the night and go drop it off instead of standing in line. Hey, voting by mail, especially if I have disabilities, the physical disabilities that make it more difficult for me to stand in line for 4 hours, I can vote by mail. And I think that scared some people that the American people were voting in such large numbers. And so we have seen these violations of what otherwise I think are
Are you comfortable that this could end the legislative filibuster for good? Probably, even if you only try to do it for 2 issues, that it won't end up getting rid of it? You think it will be held into place on other issues?
I think that there are that is very likely. Yes.
How much should former President Trump's status as a former president and a potential 2024 candidate, how much should that factor into the decision to charge him?
Well, I wouldn't dare tell the Department of Justice what to do. As a former prosecutor, I will tell you, I am not in the business of telling a prosecutor what to do with their case, because they know best the facts and the evidence as applied to the law. And so I'm not going to tell them what to do. And certainly the President and I and our administration, unlike the previous administration,
Right.
have been very, very careful to make sure that there is no question about any kind of interference in terms of the decisions that the Department of Justice makes.
All right.
In that regard.
But let me try to go to 60,000 feet. What do you say to the argument that it would be too divisive for the country to prosecute a former president?
I think that our country is a country that has gone through different periods of time where the unthinkable has happened, and where there has been a call for justice, and justice has been served. And I think that's potentially going to always be the case in our country, that people are going to demand justice, and they rightly do.
Have you thought through the scenarios that you might face on January 6, 2025?
Not at all. No. I mean, well, listen, what have I thought about? I have thought about the fact that right now we have an election in less than 2 months. And if we're going to look at timelines, that's one of the most immediate timelines that I'm looking at.
I know, but I mean, have you thought about how you might handle a certification that did not reflect the outcome of the popular vote in the state?
I haven't gotten to that point yet. I have to believe that that the United States Congress and all people who have taken an oath to defend our democracy will ensure and will stand up against anyone who tries to destroy or circumvent the rules and the practices and procedures that we've had in place that have allowed a peaceful transfer of power since the inception of our nation and the founding of our nation. And getting back to the ultimate point, that is what we're talking about when we think about January 6th. We have always had a peaceful transfer of power in our nation, no matter our differences, no matter how bloody-knuckled we've been in campaigns.
Can we say that now?
Well, certainly we were on the verge of having a very different outcome. And the injury was still an injury for which we still are experiencing the wound.
You brought up the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs. We have some polling that shows confidence in the Supreme Court is at its lowest level that we've measured in over 20 years. How much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court?
I think this is an activist court.
What does that mean?
It means that we had an established right for almost half a century, which is the right of women to make decisions about their own body as an extension of what we have decided to be the privacy rights to which all people are entitled. And this court took that constitutional right away. And we are suffering as a nation because of it. That causes me great concern about the integrity of the court overall, especially as someone who my life was inspired by people like Thurgood Marshall, the work on that court of Earl Warren, to bring a unanimous court to pass Brown v. Board of Education. This is the court that once sat Earl Warren and Thurgood Marshall. Sandra Day O'Connor. It's a very different court.
There's a bill in the Senate, Senator Kaine, Senator Collins are working on, that they say would essentially codify what Roe was, protect a right to abortion at 24 weeks. It would include some religious exemptions. Is that If that's the bill that can pass the Senate, you okay with it?
I'd have to read it and see. The details obviously matter.
Some abortion rights groups have not been as high on it as the other bill that didn't get Susan Collins' support. This one should get Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Is it more important for the Senate to find some Republican votes here?
Ideally, we codify Roe. We put into law a protection for what I believe is a constitutional right for women to make these decisions, and it would be bipartisan. Ideally, yes, it would be bipartisan.
Do you believe government should put any limit on abortion?
I believe government should not be telling women what to do with their bodies. I believe government should not be telling women how to plan their families. I believe government should not be criminalizing healthcare providers. I believe government should not be saying no exception for rape or incest. As a prosecutor, former prosecutor who specialized in child sexual assault cases, understanding the violence that occurs against women and children, and then to further subject them to those kind of inhumane conditions.
Right.
That's what I believe.
Final topic here. Since we're here in Texas, I want to ask you about the border. Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the President and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever. You're confident this border is secure?
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years. We also have to put in place a law and a plan for a pathway for citizenship for the millions of people who are here and are prepared to do what is legally required to gain citizenship. We don't have that in place because people are playing politics in a state like this and in Congress. By the way, you want to talk about bipartisanship on an issue that at one time was a bipartisan issue, both in terms of Republican senators and even presidents.
Feels like another century ago.
But sadly, and then people are playing political gamesmanship with the issue. Well,
here's another way that politics could have been played. Let me ask. Right now, one of our inflationary problems is we don't have enough labor, particularly in the service economy.
You're right.
A solution on immigration reform that increased, particularly lower wage labor, could actually have an impact on lowering inflation. How is that not the motivating force to get something done here?
I do believe that for all reasonable people are motivated and desirous that we would get something done. I think a big part of the problem, though, is that there's been political gamesmanship with this issue. It's suggesting that it's a zero-sum game. If you want to deal with the issue, there are practical solutions, which include creating a pathway to citizenship, fixing a broken immigration system, dealing with the root causes of why people are fleeing their home when most people don't want to leave home. And if they do, it's usually because they're fleeing some harm or they simply can't take care of their basic needs if they stay. There are solutions. And sadly, this has become such a partisan issue instead of something where we work on it together, agreeing that what we're doing is not working as a nation. It's not working.
Vice President Harris, appreciate the time.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.